also, I think, realizing that you're not pigeonholed. I have a lot of folks who are like, oh, well, if I get a job at a big company, then I'm a big company guy. Or if I'm a startup gal, and that's what I'm going to be. And, really, there's a lot of flexibility. You'll have a long career. You can try a lot of things. Don't sweat those decisions.
Hey there, I'm Goli Kalkaran, and this is Lessons from a Quitter, where we believe that it's never too late to start over. No matter how much time or money you've spent getting to where you are, if ultimately you are not happy, then it's time to get out. If you're feeling stuck and you feel like there's gotta be more, there's gotta be a way to feel fulfilled and excited about what you do, then this is the podcast for you. Each week, I will sit down with an inspiring guest who quit their professional career in order to forge their own path and create a life that they love. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Lessons from a Quitter. I am so excited to have you here, and we will jump into an awesome episode with Josh Zloof in a moment. I shared last week that we are having our first live event in Irvine, California on August 15th. If you are in the Southern California area, then I would love to see you there and meet you and talk to you about your quitter journey. We will have an awesome live podcast recording with 4 past guests that are just incredible, and I will talk about them more in the coming weeks. We will have a career coach lead a session. We will have dinner and drinks and all this wonderful stuff. It's going to be a really fun night of connecting and networking and finding support. I want you there. So if you are around the area, please go to quitterclub.com/event and sign up for what is going to be a really awesome night. August 15th, 6 to 9 p.m. It's going to be great. I hope to see you all there. Now, today's episode is, I'm biased. They're all great, but this one is really good. We have Josh Zloof on the show. Now, what would you do if you started a company and it failed? What would you do if you started multiple companies and they failed? I think that for most of us, at some point, we just decided, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. What I love about Josh's story is that he didn't have that pity party. He realized that a lot of the failures that he had were just skills that he lacked. And so he went out and got those skills and tried again and tried again. And in fact, in a year and a half, he tried 10 different businesses, 10 different ideas, until he really figured out his value system and what he wanted to pursue. And that's what finally led him to Sudden Coffee. Josh is now the co-founder and CEO of Sudden Coffee, but he's passionate about more than just serving up a great cup of coffee. This company really started with the idea of making 1 billion people happy. And he found the way to make that happy through coffee. And he has now served over 100,000 cups of their single origin, specialty grade, instant coffee delivered right to your door. They've raised over $3.3 million from investors like Y Combinator and CRV. And he's been featured in New York Times, Food and Wine, GQ. The company is doing incredible things. And we'll find out more about how they are bringing this quality cup coffee to instant coffee, but also about how he pushed through all of that doubt and the failures in order to really be led to something that is aligned with his values and his passions. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk to Josh. Hi, Josh. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you, and I can't wait to talk all things about Sudden Coffee. But before we get to what you're doing now, why don't you take us back to the beginning of your career and let us know a little bit about what you studied in school and what you kind of expected to be doing for your career. What did you think coming out of school you would be getting into?
Totally. That's a great question. So in school, I studied industrial engineering. At the beginning of school, I had this kind of weird thing to be inspired by, but I was in a McDonald's and there was a really long line. And my mind just started going into how you could rearrange the machines and do all this stuff. And so I wanted to figure out how you could get paid to do that. And so I studied industrial engineering, and it was all this stuff around redoing factories and things like that. And I thought that I wanted to be a consultant, because when you go into consulting, you can kind of get paid to do stuff like that. So I went into consulting after school. I was at a company called McKinsey and spent 3 years there. And originally, I thought that my path was going to be to become a partner at this consulting firm, and that was where I was going to go. And yeah, that was my right out of the gate.
So, and McKinsey is, a very big and well-known consulting firm. And so a lot of times I think that when you are on that traditional path and you're climbing that corporate ladder, it is very easy to get stuck there where you kind of, just go to the next step and try to get to the next thing. And so when did you start kind of having an inkling to try something else or to venture out into other things?
Yeah, I think I tried doing a startup at two separate points in my career. First was right after McKinsey, and then I actually went to Groupon to learn how to get into tech right after that, after trying to do startup, and then jumped into this after that. The first time around, so I had a roommate when I was at McKinsey. I was living in Boston, and he was running his company out of our apartment. And so I would be coming home from these really long days, and my roommate would, just be whiteboarding something or, talking through crazy ideas. And it was so foreign to me. And I just got excited by, the idea of, thinking through, how could I jump into this myself? And also just how could I use tech to solve the problems I was working on as a consultant? So we would do these factory projects and everything was super pen and paper. And so I was always wondering, what's the iPad app for a factory? How do I use tech for the same thing?
When you left McKinsey, did you leave in order to start your own company?
Yeah. So McKinsey and a lot of similar places have a 3-year program or 2 to 3 year program. And after that, most people go to business school and then go back to the firm. And that's kind of the standard trajectory. And so for me, I had, so there were 4 of us in this apartment, and I had 2 other roommates at the time. And we all said, hey, we're not going to do the traditional thing. We're going to do, and now I think doing a startup is a little more, normal. But back then we said, hey, we're just going to quit our jobs and go do a startup. And people thought we were crazy. Like we were living off our savings. All 3 of us moved into my parents' house, and we were working out of the office, and, sort of like a regression in life. But yeah, it was something that we just wanted to take a swing at.
And I mean, what did your parents think? I know that McKinsey is a very prestigious job, and I'm assuming it was well paying. And so you're going to jump from that to not making any money and trying this thing out and moving back into your parents' house. Were they supportive?
They hated it. It was funny because my dad has actually done 2 startups. And so I thought that, they would totally get it and be supportive. But both my parents, I think on the surface, they were supportive and were helpful, but they were always constantly pushing, like, why don't you go back to McKinsey? Especially leaving to not have any income was a big thing for them. And then even the second time when I did it, when I was a lot more clear on what I was doing and what my process was, they were still like, pushing me back to get a real job or to get a paycheck.
Yeah. When you quit, did you guys have a financial plan? Did you save up a certain amount before you knew you were ready to quit? And how long of a runway did you give yourself to not get paid? Yeah.
So the first time I saved up enough to live for about 6 months. So the first time, we didn't really have a plan. I think we had an idea that we thought that we were going to do. We wanted to make a way to order drinks on your phone at a bar. Oh. And so I think the thing, when a lot of times when you're quitting your job to do startup, you're like, okay, cool. I'm leaving my job for this idea. This is the idea that's working in my head. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go build this company. And so we saved up 6 months, and, the idea was, okay, we're going to go and we're going to move to San Francisco or Silicon Valley, and we're going to raise money in 3 months, and it's going to be great. and we're going to be super successful and blah, blah, blah. And so that was kind of the plan. Before we left our jobs, we had made, a sort of business plan in PowerPoint. We were kind of sketching out ideas for an app, but we didn't really know how to make apps. All 3 of us weren't. We'd never made an app before. So it was really half-baked, but we tried. So we sat there for 6 months. We tried a few different ideas. And I think that's the thing when you start working on a startup that you don't realize is the first idea probably won't work. And so we powered through a few other ones. And so the second time I did it, I had saved up a lot more, And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this for at least a year or a year and a half. And it's going to be about trying out different ideas. It's not going to be about, I had one that I wanted to do, but I was very much already aware that it probably wasn't going to work. And I was just ready. I was going to hit my head against a wall until I found something that worked.
Oh my God, I love that. And I have a lot of questions about that, but kind of going back first to this first time. So once I'm assuming, the money is starting to run out and you guys haven't made this work. I'm assuming you went back and got another job. Was there like a sense of like failure or upset that, I don't know, a lot of times we tend to get down on ourselves when we have this vision or dream that we wanted, to succeed and it doesn't work. Like, how were you feeling when you had to then go back to the workforce?
Yeah, I think absolutely. So we tried 3 or 4 different ideas during that period. And I think, the biggest sense of failure was letting go of the first one and realizing, hey, this is harder than we thought.
Right.
And then going through, the feeling of failure really comes when you build something that you're proud of and you share it with people, or this is at least for me, I share it with people and then they're not as into it, or, it's not really hooking for people. And then I think, the nice thing about getting a job afterwards was I sort of identified through that process, like these are the gaps in myself, or this is what I want to learn. Mm-hmm. And it actually helped me be a lot more intentional about what kind of job I wanted afterwards. Like I knew that, okay, cool. I want these set of skills. This is the job I want to go after. I got a job making the app that I wanted to make as a startup, but for a company. And so that was kind of cool. And believe it or not, most employers were actually, a lot of times going into it, you think like, hey, I'm going to just have nothing on my resume for this period. But a lot of people were really, really like, that was a huge plus for people. And I realize that now when I'm hiring people, that like why that is, but it actually made getting a job a lot easier.
Oh, that's really interesting. Because I do think a lot of times we are so worried about either that gap on the resume and also like not looking like a failure to other people, like saying like, oh, I don't want to put, if I put this on the resume and then say this startup didn't work, like what is this employer going to think? And it's so nice to hear these things that like those things can actually work in your favor. Absolutely.
It 100% does work in your favor.
And why was that such a positive for your employer?
So, when you're hiring someone into like a leadership position in a company, whether it's like a manager, director, or VP, there's going to be tough decisions that person that you have to make, especially if it's at an aggressive company. And so you need to have a certain level of, you're willing to take a risk, or you're willing to try something, or you're willing to do something hard. And I think just the fact, like when I see someone's resume, to think like, okay, this person was willing to quit their job, take no income, take a really big risk, even if it was only for 3 months. Like it's so often the case that, someone wants to go from job to job to job, like not even willing to quit their job, take a month off and travel and go apply for jobs. And so when I see on someone's resume, like, hey, you were willing to try this for 6 months, even if it didn't go anywhere, I know that that person has a level of willingness to try things, of risk tolerance, of like, yes, something is scary, but they'll try it out. A lot of people don't have, just from seeing that. Like there's a lot of times, and I have a lot of, friends or acquaintances who always want to try doing a startup, years later, they never actually try it. And so when you see that someone has, you're like, okay, cool. Like they put their money where their mouth is. They are willing to take a risk.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's such a good way of looking at it. And so you go to Groupon and it seems like you were very intentional. How did you find the exact job that you wanted? I mean, were you creating something that seemed like it was perfect for you at the time?
Yeah. So, and I think this is another interesting thing is that, a lot of times, you're unhappy at your job and, startup is the first thing that comes to mind, but also, you don't have time to really figure out what job you want to do next when you're at your current job. And so even that process, even if you called it 6 months of figuring out the ideal job, it might have just been that while also trying to do startup. But basically, I knew that I was like, I wanted to do some type of idea that had to do with online ordering, restaurants, etc. That was the idea that I left when I was trying to do McKinsey. And so as you're getting into that space as a startup, you start like reading about all of the different companies that are doing similar things or that are related, or, technologies you could piggyback on. And so we knew, and this was before Groupon's downfall. Groupon was sort of like, the darling of Wall Street at the time. It was kind of like Uber of the day, growing really fast. And Groupon was the only company that had thousands of restaurant relationships. And so it was like really obvious to me, even before Groupon started working on it, that, hey, like it makes sense for Groupon to start selling, products like what we wanted to make to restaurants. And I had a friend who I knew from college who by chance was working there. And I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I think I reached out to him and said, hey, like, are you doing, anything having to do with online ordering? And then a couple months later, he said, hey, we're growing this team. We're trying to build apps it was called Merchant Operating System. We want to build the operating system for a small business. And so I knew that. So he reached out to me about that. And then the other part was I knew that in trying to do startup, I was like, I'm really good at making slides, as a consultant ends up being, but I don't know how to make apps. And so there's this thing called being a product manager that I hadn't heard of until trying to do this. And I was like, if I become a product manager, I'll know how to make apps, and then I can go back and do startup later, and I'll have all the skills I need. So I really want to become a product manager. So I basically kind of identified both Groupon. Square was another company at the time that was in the space, and there were a couple others, but I knew that I wanted to work on this type of problem, and I knew I wanted to be a product manager. And so I kind of like pushed for that type of thing. And so it was both identifying things I was passionate about and also identifying the gaps in my own skills. Like I tried the thing that was really hard. I hit a wall and I said, okay, now if I can only figure out these things, then I'll be better at it the next time.
I love that approach. And it seems like when you were going for this, then you were going with the intention of giving a startup a shot. Again, it was just kind of gaining some more skills before you do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've definitely realized that, a thing that I personally like is, trying to do something that's like a tour of duty at a big company that's really about learning, like where, you can get paid to learn. There's management training, there's, courses, it's like all included. And then having periods that are really just about your own growth, where it's like, you're not going to have the resources, but you're really trying to like push as much as possible. I've seen my career sort of like alternating between those two states.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you can be conscious of it, a lot of times I don't want to say like we're like sleepwalking through our careers, but it's like you pick something and you just go down that path. And I think you've clearly taken a very conscious approach of like, I'm going to this for this purpose. And a lot of times going to big companies can serve like a lot of wonderful benefits besides just a steady paycheck. But like you were saying, learning a specific set of skills or having resources. And if you look at it as like a stepping stone to your next thing, it can be invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially also, I think, realizing that you're not pigeonholed. I have a lot of folks who are like, oh, well, if I get a job at a big company, then I'm a big company guy. Or if I'm a startup gal, and that's what I'm going to be. And, really, like, there's a lot of flexibility. Life, you'll have a long career. You can try a lot of things.
Yeah.
And, don't sweat those decisions as much, I guess.
No, I actually love that advice. I think that we make things so much bigger of a deal than they have to be. And what I love, like looking at the longevity of your career. And I think a lot of people attach too much, I don't know how the correct way to say this, but like it's a reflection of their personality. So I think a lot of people in your position might have looked at like, oh, I'm going back to a big company. And that somehow reflects something about me of not being able to make it work at the startup. But it's like, just looking at it as like, okay, I didn't have these skills. I'm going to go get those skills and then I'll try it again.
Totally. Yeah.
But clearly you wanted to give the startup another try. And this might be just, a reflection of being in Silicon Valley. And I think it's a lot more understandable that startups fail and people try multiple times. But I feel like the average person, if they try something like entrepreneurship or a business and it doesn't work the first time, like I said, it becomes more of like a reflection of like, I'm not good enough or I don't, I can't make it work. So did you have any like inhibitions about setting out again on your own?
Oh, absolutely. I consider myself actually like pretty emotionally fragile when it comes to stuff like that. I have a couple other friends who are just like, they seem completely unfazed by failure. But for me, it's the opposite. Like every idea that I tried, when before Sudden Coffee, I spent a year and a half trying idea after idea, tried working with different people and all that stuff. And after every, switch with the person I'm working with or switch with the idea, I felt this sense of like, I suck. Or, it got to a point where I couldn't even remember the person I was when I was working at Groupon. I was like, was I really smart enough to have that job? Or like, was I an imposter? Or, all these like defeating thoughts. I think the thing that was different the second time around is I had a few different bosses at Groupon during my time there. But one of the guys that I worked for, he told me while we were going through something tough at Groupon, he said, I know you want to do startup. Listen, it's going to be really tough mentally. So like you're going to go through all these failures. So use this time now to mentally prepare yourself. Like get used to failure. That feeling is okay. Get used to feeling it. Get used to like turning it off or controlling it or like coming out of it. And so going into that second time around, I was already, it's sort of like putting up the wall before you go to war. Like I was like getting ready for it, like saving up supplies, et cetera. Yeah. And then when I did do the startup, I made sure like pretty early on, I got a coach for myself and I got a therapist and all of these things that were around like protecting my mental health because of that, because I knew that that was the thing I would face.
That is so smart. I mean, that's such great advice that you got. And I think startups are, a beast unto themselves. But I think even starting a small company or bootstrap company or anything like starting an online business that a lot of people are doing now, honestly, like I'd say 90% of it is mindset. Everything else is kind of figure outable and there's some setbacks and you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but it's just getting over that imposter syndrome or, who am I to do this or it's never going to work. And building up kind of a system, whether that's through therapists or coaching or masterminds or whatever, is so key to just be able to deal with the overwhelm and the imposter syndrome and all these other mindset things to keep you on that path.
Totally. Yeah, I cannot agree more.
So how long were you at Groupon before you left the second time?
It was about 2.5 years. But yeah, like 2.5 years.
Okay. So you were there like 2.5 years. And you said that you wanted to give yourself about a year of runway, right? To just give things a shot. But when you left, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do or you were just going to give yourself time to figure it out?
Yeah. So when I left this time around, I said, I'm not going to leave until I have at least a prototype of a service or something. And I want someone to have paid me at least $5 for this thing that I'm going to start before I leave Groupon. And so I started this business. It was called Shopping Sex. That was the first name. And the idea was that we'd send a personal shopper to your house, look at your closet, and pick out clothes for you. Because I hated shopping.
Yeah.
And so we didn't get super far along. I just had an email list of friends and I found a shopper on Craigslist and I had gotten a couple friends to pay me for the service because they were interested. But I was like, okay, cool. Like I've gotten far enough that I'm ready to go.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the episode in 1 second. I just wanted to let you know that I am offering a free masterclass at the end of this month because I know so many of you want to start a side hustle or even figure out what your next step should be, but there just never seems to be any time between kids and work and a million other obligations. It seems like starting something on the side is a pipe dream. I get it. I was there, but I found a system that helped me manage my calendar and set realistic goals that I can work to and actually create the things that I want to do. And it has allowed me to start a company from scratch, which included figuring out design, hardware, manufacturing, software, all the things, and produce this podcast and pump out weekly content while only working part-time and staying at home with my kids. And I only do that because I have a system that works. And I want to teach it to you because I don't want time to be the thing that is stopping you from pursuing your dreams. So if you want to learn it, I would love to have you there. I'm only offering it twice live. It's July 29th and 30th. You can sign up at quitterclub.com/plan. Hope to see you there. And now back to the episode. So kind of taking a step back, you hear a lot of like mixed advice for people that want to start a company. And I honestly think that the startup culture is obviously very different than people that are starting their own small businesses. But one of the things that you hear all the time is that like you should find what you're passionate about and you should, go after things that light you up or whatever. But it seems like for you, you're just trying to find a problem to solve, right? It doesn't seem like, I don't know, were you particularly passionate about like shopping, like putting together clothes for people that don't like shopping, or what was like the driving force behind these projects?
Yeah, I've always been excited about the intersection of operations and tech. And so at the time, this is like circa 2015, 2014, there were all of these on-demand services. Like Uber had taken off, and then, there was food delivery and massage delivery and haircut delivery and like all these things. And so I was just looking at everything in the space, and I was like, I'm really into operations, and these are all, there's staffing problems and, optimization problems around getting people from point A to point B and all this stuff. And so that was, I think, the driving force. I think my twist on that advice is I think it's not something that you're passionate about as much as something that's aligned with your values. And that might, the topic is one lens, like saying whether you're passionate about like clothing versus passionate about food versus passionate about advertising. That like one lens is like, that's the topic that you're working on. Another lens is the people you're working with, or another lens is the day-to-day work. Like, are you in Excel all day or are you in meetings all day? And so I found that, and this is through, I had a coach at the time, finding my values and finding ideas that worked in line with that was really good. But the other part is, to your point earlier, is you also just kind of have to try a bunch of problems and see which ones have a hook. And both of it is a hook with like the customer and a hook with you. Right. Like you'll kind of just know.
Yeah.
The shopping idea, for example, failed with me working on it, but I don't think it's a bad idea. I just think that it didn't work with my brain or how I process things.
No, I think that's great advice. I actually I don't know, not that I'm against the advice of like following your passion. I think that if you have things that you're super passionate about, I think a lot of times people stop themselves because they think like, well, I'm not passionate about this or that. And I agree that I think there's other aspects of it. Like when I left law and I was starting my photo booth company, I wasn't particularly passionate about photo booths in that sense, but I was really excited about starting a business and figuring out manufacturing and figuring out how to, and I think even that was what kind of drove me. And I don't necessarily think that's like a wrong way of going about it. I think if you have a part of it, whether it's the problem, whether it's the day-to-day, whether it's something that you want to learn about, like it's a step, and who knows where that leads you. That back to what we were saying, like, it doesn't have to be the rest of your life. It's like one thing that you're trying next.
Exactly. It's like, maybe like in your case, what you're passionate about or what your value is maybe like the feeling of having ownership of something,
right.
like being able to work on all sides of the problem or being dynamic. And so any job where you're not dynamic, whether it's a startup or whether it's, you're working at a law firm, if you can't work on 5 different things in a day, you're not going to be happy.
Right.
And so it's more like finding things that are in alignment with that, regardless of what topic it's about,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So you go from the shopping idea and you run through, I'm assuming, a bunch of other ideas. How did you finally get to Sudden Coffee?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's really amorphous and kind of hard to repeat. But I think I kind of have an idea now of a process for it or how you could do it. But basically, I went from idea to idea. There was a period where I was considering working on a gas delivery idea. At some point, I got hired by a serial entrepreneur who wanted to pay other entrepreneurs to like help work on other ideas. So I was getting like paid a minimal salary, trying out idea after idea, tried a coaching business, tried an idea to help find more drivers for Uber, tried like a whole bunch of things like that. Eventually, I hired a coach for myself. And because actually one of the ideas I was working on was a coaching business. So I was like, oh, I've never had a coach. Let me hire a coach. And went through the values exercise. And I realized that I really enjoy things that are service oriented and food oriented. And because it helps me connect with people. And so then that helped me focus. So I started working on ideas that were only food or drink related. And again, under the guidance of the coach, I tried out a new thing every couple months. And eventually the last idea I was trying was a burrito bowl business. And we were about to launch at least a pilot, and my chef quit. And I was super bummed out. And by chance, I had an old boss reach out to me, and we were just grabbing coffee, and I told him I was working on this food thing, and he's like, oh, hey, like, I didn't know you were in food. Let me connect you with, I have this guy who we're advising, and he's doing this coffee thing, and you should meet up with him. Are you free right now? And I was like, well, and it was one of those, like, typically my answer would have been like, Philip, oh, I have something I need to get to. But I was just like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to go and meet this guy.
Yeah.
And I go to a garage and meet my co-founder, and he had just, he had a prototype for Sudden Coffee, like a coffee powder. And we just started talking, and he said, I said, why? He was kind of like, in my mind at the time, the hipster barista archetype. And I was like, why would you make instant coffee? And he said, I want to to me, coffee is about making people feel good. And I want to make more people feel good. I have a cafe, it's too small. And if I make instant coffee, I could make billions of people feel good. And I had literally, this is like going back to the values thing, I had written on a note card why I was doing this food stuff. And I said, I can make people happy through food. And I wrote that on a note card. And so when I heard that, I was like, okay, we're immediately aligned on values.
Right.
And so it didn't matter for me that I didn't know anything about coffee. I knew that there was like a values alignment. And it was also, I knew that the problems that he was facing were manufacturing and tech oriented. So I was like, great, those are like both things that I'm excited about. I am also excited about this value. And, we started working on it.
That's so incredible. I mean, it's, I know a lot of people like talk about like the universe, like aligning and, things just like falling into people's lap. And I like to point out on this podcast that one of the reasons I go so in depth about people's like journey is because it's like each step kind of leads you to the next. And if you're brave enough to put yourself out there and to try things, and like, it's funny how things just align. And we have that a lot with guests where it's like, oh, I was going to give up. And then this, miraculous thing happened. And I think even with this, going through all of these processes, most people wouldn't, pivot from company to company to company idea, because it again goes back to like, I'm a failure. I can't make this work. And so to keep doing that, and like going back to the coaching, I think getting really clear and getting help, so often we try to do everything alone, and it's hard to see your blind spots. And when there's someone that can like guide you, it makes things so much clearer for you and gives you a path. And so it's just so incredible that all of that stuff does ultimately just lead you on a path that you should be on.
Totally. Yeah. Especially, when you're working alone, I think it's getting that extra help is really, really important.
How did you find your coach?
Yeah. Another random thing. I was working on a coaching business, and I had a friend who my roommate at the time, his friend was staying with us on the couch. And I was just talking about how I was working on 4 different ideas simultaneously and feeling really overwhelmed. And I mentioned, the coaching business, and he was like, my girlfriend, now his wife, but girlfriend at the time, is a coach, and you should talk to her just to learn how coaching works. And I got on the phone with her and heard what she did. And I was like, I could use that. And that's kind of how it started.
That's awesome. Okay. So now getting back, so you meet your co-founder, and like he'd already developed the product?
Yeah. So he had about 2 or 3 months before, he had met a professor who used to work at Nespresso and at a conference, and the idea of really good instant coffee came up. And the professor said, yeah, it's possible. It's just really hard to make it scalable and cheap. And so Kale, he tracked down a freeze dryer and basically made a pot of coffee and freeze dried it. And so he had been working out of a garage in San Francisco with this freeze dryer, basically freeze drying pots of coffee. And so, yeah, he had the prototype. It had not been sold yet to anyone. It was and the problem was basically capacity and cost. It was just really expensive to make this. And so that's kind of where we had a good alignment. We kind of filled each other's gaps to that end.
Yeah. And so where did you guys take this? What did you guys do next?
Yeah. So when we first, in that first day, I said, I think whenever you're starting a business and you're starting to work with people, and I got this from a friend of mine, part of what you're also testing out is the team, like working with this person who you might spend the next couple of years with. And so as much as you're testing out the idea, you want to test out who you're working with. So I said, why don't we Christmas was coming up. I said, let's spend, 2 to 3 weeks and let's try and sell this as fast as we can. Like, let's, do all the things we need to do and we'll sell 100 of these things as a stocking stuffer. Do you have time in the next 2 weeks? Like, do you think that'll work? And he was like, yeah. And so we wrote up a game plan. He was going to make the coffee. I was going to do the packaging and like all the other stuff. We made a website and we made a flash sale. We basically posted it on Facebook and we said, we have 100 of these things. It was $5 for 2, which at the time to us was crazy. Like, who's going to pay $2.50 for an instant coffee? And we sold out in 30 seconds.
Oh my God. Just from your own networks.
Yeah, just from our networks. And, compared to everything else I'd worked on, that was incredible, and that was sort of the signal. It was cool because I had done so many different ideas, I could tell when something felt different at that point, whereas before I wouldn't have been able to know.
Right. So you guys get that. And then you've now gone on you guys have raised over $3.3 million and you were in Y Combinator and other very prestigious accelerators and programs. How did the rest of that kind of come about? Did you guys just start immediately fundraising or did you try to kind of bootstrap for a little bit?
Yeah. So he had actually raised a seed round before we met. And basically the guy who connected us, who's my old boss at Groupon, his name's Youre. He was sort of a serial entrepreneur. His partner, Katarina Fake, is one of the founders of Flickr. And so they had met Kalle in Finland because Yure's from Finland. And they were opening a cafe and they needed a barista and they hired Kalle. And around that same summer, by chance, Kalle had the idea for Sudden Coffee or for this instant coffee. And they said, hey, move out to San Francisco. We'll help you raise a seed round. And so, they kind of helped that happen and introduced us. And so kind of helped us get started. So then we started scaling. Our problem at the beginning was we couldn't make enough. And it used to cost $6 to make one cup. So it was really expensive and we could only make about 100 a week or 100 a month or, so really tiny. So we just spent 6 months, for me, it was basically taking all the stuff I learned at McKinsey and getting to implement it, on myself. It was just really fun and it's stressful, but really fun. And so started doing that. And then we were running out of money. And so we knew we needed to raise more. And this was another one of these Black Swan events. So we did a press release. Kalle happened to know a New York Times coffee writer just through the coffee community. We ended up in the New York Times and an investor happened to be reading the New York Times, happened to be looking for a coffee or a caffeine-based subscription. Was in San Francisco, looked us up and called us. And it happened to be when we were trying to raise money. And then we had a term sheet, and this is we raised a round that was 2.7 million. That was for that round. And then every 6 months, so Kalle was excited about joining Y Combinator. And so we just kept applying. I think he had applied 4 times in his life by that point. And so we finally got in because, we were getting good press. We were kind of picking up customers. We had raised additional round. And so that helped us get into Y Combinator as well.
That's so incredible. And I know you keep saying that it's and it happened and it seems like it's sort of, I guess, luck. But again, I would say putting yourself out there, and doing all of this stuff and, even having these contacts, all of this stuff, it's it's interesting, how you don't realize things, from years before will affect you or how your network and stuff. And it's all just like putting yourself out there. And it's amazing to see it all come together.
Yeah, I would say I'd said earlier that I kind of have an idea of like how it kind of works behind the scenes. I think like what I realized is there are two things that you have to do for these. And this has happened a few times in my career and in Sudden, and I call them black swan events. I think it's like getting very, very clear on your strategy or what you want. Like, what are the three things that you want this quarter or this 6 months, and being very crisp about that. And then the second part is putting yourself out there, or I call it like broadcasting. And it's everything from like writing a blog post. It also is like going to conferences. It's doing these things that you can't necessarily say will result in solving your problem. And it was really counterintuitive for me. Like, I have an engineer mindset. So for me, it's like, okay, this is my strategy. And then how do I break that down into milestones? And then how do I break that down into steps and then go do those steps?
Right.
And instead, it's really like, do the first part, like get really clear on the strategy, but then don't worry about the plan. And instead, go do a bunch of things that feel somewhat random, that are more broadcast based instead of like hunting based, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so now, what does your team look like? What does the company look like right now?
We're now 10 people. We're actually fundraising again. We're trying to raise a Series A, and we've just been really capacity constrained. So we made a really big pivot in our business. I would say, so all of this happened at the end of 2015. And so now we've been doing this for almost 4 years. And the first few years, we were really trying to just figure out exactly who the customer was. We were trying the subscription model. It didn't really work, to be honest. Also, the coffee was really expensive. So we were really trying to figure out how to make it a lot cheaper without hurting quality. And so that took a lot of time, a lot of research and development to do that. And so in the last 6 months, we switched our business model where basically now we make custom coffees for any high-end coffee company in the world. So yeah, so like a coffee company, like Intelligentsia or Quater Coffee sends us their coffee beans, and we turn it into instant coffee. We make them a custom label, a custom box, and they sell it in their stores or in Whole Foods or other places under their brand.
Oh, that's so interesting. And so people can't buy it from you guys now, just like through your website.
Yeah, you can't buy it through our website just yet. So you can still buy our subscription product through our website. It's kind of, we just keep it out there, but you can buy these custom coffees either in the store themselves of the roaster, on the roaster's website, or it's going to be in more and more different locations. So in the Bay Area, for example, you can buy our product that's under Ritual Coffee at 40 different Whole Foods.
Oh, cool.
You can buy it at any Intelligentsia cafe if you're in Southern California or in other places in the country. And so you're going to start to see, anytime you see coffee, instant coffee in a test tube, that's made by us.
That's so cool. And what are you guys hoping for? Like, I know with startups, it's kind of a different exit strategy or when it's usually, as opposed to like having your small business. But I mean, what's on the horizon for you guys? Is it just to keep growing for now?
Yeah, I think, we really, in the last 6 months, hit our stride with this. We had our first month this month. A couple of years ago, I'd always been saying, we know we're on the next level when we get 100,000 cups ordered in 1 month. And we finally hit that this month.
Congratulations.
Or last month. Yeah. And it's one of those, like, it doesn't feel real, or it's just like, I can't, I've been talking about it in theory for so long. And so, I think from a product perspective, I really think that in the next few years, every coffee company that we all know is going to have their own instant coffee. In the same way that everyone wants cold brew now, you're going to see everyone having an instant coffee. It's really building up the capacity to be able to support that and to be able to make it happen. And then long term, I think we don't know where, like, in terms of an exit strategy, I think eventually most companies like us, you get acquired by a large CPG company. There's obviously like a slim chance, but some companies go public, and that would be really cool. But I think I've realized that we're really building a new category. A really good instant coffee didn't exist before now. And so we're excited to kind of build out this new era, this new form factor for coffee, and just take it as far as we can.
Well, that sounds wonderful. This is super exciting. Where can people find you guys if they want to learn more or follow along on your journey?
Yeah, so suddencoffee.com is our website, or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. That's all, Sudden Coffee. We do sell our own coffee on our website. And then also, if you look up any of our roasters, I think the ones that have active products online are Equator, Intelligentsia, Chromatic, Ritual. If you just go to those websites, you search for those coffee companies, you can buy our roaster branded products off of their websites or in stores. And definitely, I would say within the next year, you'll be seeing this at Whole Foods and other grocery stores. Just look for really good instant coffee and you'll see the Sudden Coffee insignia in the corner of the box.
That's so exciting. I will link to all of that in the show notes in case people can't write it down. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really insightful and really inspiring.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it was really great to talk to you.
I love what Josh is building, and here are my 3 takeaways. If you don't succeed the first time, it isn't a reflection of who you are or what you're capable of. It might just mean that you don't have all the skills you need. So learn from it, acquire those skills, and try again. 2, make sure you're clear on your values. Once you know your values, it becomes a lot easier to determine what kind of things you'd like to be doing and working on. And that leads to number 3, which is put a system in place that will help you succeed. Josh talked about how he got a therapist and a coach. I mean, it's pretty near impossible to do this completely alone. I mean, you can, it'll just take a lot longer and with a lot more heartache. So find people that can help you get out of your own way so that you can succeed. I hope you liked this episode. And with that, I will see you guys next week for our 1-year anniversary. I can't believe it. Please join us and I will talk to you then. Thank you so much for listening. I can't tell you how much it means to me. If you liked the podcast, please rate and review us on iTunes. It'll help other people find the show. If you want to connect or reach out, follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Lessons from a Quitter and on Twitter at Quitter Podcast. I would love to hear from you guys. And I'll see you on the next episode.